when you're in the presence of the real thing, as you are with McCarthy and DeLillo and Sam Lipsyte, you know nothing in you could propose to the page the kind of force, the kind of drama that this man can with a mere gesture.
Who is Gordon Lish? Over the years, he's been described as a bully, a genius, a cheat, a ghost. But what he truly is an advocate for great American fiction writing, an admirer of clean, perfected sentences, a champion of worthy authors. For more than 3 decades, Gordon J. Lish was one of the most prominent and influential fiction editors in America. Like Ezra Pound and Maxwell Perkins, he kept a close relationship with his authors as a teacher, mentor, advocate, and friend, and he continues to fight for work he believes is worthy.
If you care about writing, if you care about reading, if you care about yourself, if you care about being present for the revelation of being, if you care about ontology as we are delivered it by the conditions, you must read Eugene Martin's Firework.
Gordon Lish was born in Hewlett, New York in 1934. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in English from Arizona State University in 1959. After a year of graduate study, he taught English at Mills High School just outside San Francisco. But he was fired after just 3 years for his radical teaching styles. He said the Pledge of Allegiance too quickly, wore hats indoors, sponsored avant-garde student poetry, used the word shit in a short story, and was generally unpredictable and moody-looking, according to administrators. Around this time, however, Lish was also working on another project, establishing a new avant-garde literary magazine. He was a founder and editor of Genesis West, which celebrated and introduced to authors and poets like Neil Cassidy, Ken Casey, Jack Kerouac, and Allen Ginsberg. Genesis West produced 8 volumes between 1961 and 1965, after which Lish became the director of linguistic studies at Behavioral Research Laboratories in Menlo Park, California. There, he worked on several works of nonfiction, including a textbook on English grammar. It's also where he met Raymond Carver. The two became friends, and Lish edited several of Carver's short stories, helping them to get published in national magazines. In 1969, Lish and his family moved to New York City, where he became the fiction editor at Esquire magazine, a position he held until 1976. There, he earned the nickname Captain Fiction for his work as an advocate and mentor for so many up-and-coming authors, writers like Carver, Richard Ford, Cynthia Ozick, Don DeLillo, Raymond Kennedy, and Barry Hannah. In 1977, Lish became a senior editor with the Alfred A. Knopf publishing firm. There, he continued to champion the work of fiction authors, but by far his most famous protege was still Raymond Carver, who gained national acclaim in the 1980s. Carver's work was praised for its lean sentences and minimalist style, grouped with a few other authors from the 70s and 80s as reflecting dirty realism. His early life was marked by poverty and alcohol abuse, themes which are common in his short stories. In the years since his death, however, many critics have argued that the minimalism and sense of hopelessness found in Carver's early stories was actually a product of Gordon Lish's editing, and not Carver's original intent. This has sparked great debate among readers, other writers, publishers, and Carver's widow, the poet Tess Gallagher. Many of Carver's original manuscripts, those sent to Gordon Lish for editing, are held at the Lilly Library at the University of Indiana, Bloomington. Scholars have compared these early manuscripts, which bear the heavy slash and edit marks of Lish, to the published versions of his stories. The results have been controversial. In August 1998, 10 years after Carver's death, D.T. Max published an article in the New York Times entitled The Carver Chronicles, which exposed the heavy-handed, even brutal editing style of Gordon Lish. Max studied the edited manuscripts from What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, Carver's collection of short stories published by Knopf in 1981. It looked as if a temperamental 7-year-old had got hold of the stories, Max wrote. Huge chunks of the stories were cut, and often new beginnings and endings were written in, altering the theme and tone of many stories. In this collection, about half of the original words were cut, and Lish rewrote 10 of the 13 endings. Lish's black felt tip markings sometimes obliterate the original text, Max writes. Carver was shocked by these edits at first. but he believed Lish saw something in his writing that he was missing, something he was able to pull out through his edits. In a letter to Lish, he wrote, "I see what it is that you've done, what you've pulled out of it, and I'm awed and astonished, startled even, with your insights." Lish cut out what he saw as false lyricism, reducing the stories to the minimalist forms for which Carver was so well known. While these stark, brutally poignant versions are what initially brought Carver to the national spotlight, he had serious reservations about the integrity of this work. Just before the publication of What We Talk About When We Talk About Love, Raymond Carver sent a desperate letter to Lish, begging him to stall the publication. He was afraid he would be found out, that his reputation would be ruined. "Please, Gordon, for God's sake, help me in this and try to understand. I've got to pull out of this one. I can't take the risk as to what might happen to me," he wrote. The publication, however, went on with Lish's edits, and the book was received with critical acclaim. The New York Times touted the stories as carefully shaped, shorn of ornamentation, and marked by spells of quiet and tensed apprehension. But how much of this was a result of Lish's heavy intervention? Carver was clearly uncomfortable with the breadth of Lish's cuts. In an interview with the Paris Review in 1983, he said, "I knew I'd gone as far the other way as I could or wanted to go, cutting everything down to the marrow, not just to the bone." In a review of the last book, somebody called me a minimalist writer. The reviewer meant it as a compliment, but I didn't like it. For his next publication, Carver stood up to Lish, demanding that he take a lighter hand to the edit. "I can't undergo the kind of surgical amputation and transplant that might make them some way fit into the carton so the lid will close. Please help me with this book as a good editor, the best, not as my ghost." "So be it," Lish replied, and gave the manuscript for Cathedral only a light edit. But Lish was offended by what he saw as Carver's betrayal and ingratitude. According to D.T. Max, Lish thought of himself as Carver's ventriloquist, and wanted to take most of the credit for the work's success. Lish described Carver as a mediocrity that he had plucked from obscurity. Not surprisingly, their relationship quickly soured, then ended. While Lish may have wanted to take credit for Carver's accomplishments, Carver remained profoundly successful after their split. Toward the end of his life, he even began republishing some of the original versions of stories Lish had edited. He never spoke ill of his former editor, always praising his talent and his friendship, but he continued to assert his artistic independence. Tess Gallagher, Carver's widow, has more recently organized the publication of Beginners, a collection of the original versions of the stories published in What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. This collection, which was released in 2009, contains passages for comparison between the two versions. Here's a look at some of the differences. These are the final passages from the story One More Thing, as Carver originally wrote it. This passage is 214 words long. And here is Lish's edited version. Now it's just 34 words, a reduction of 84%. This passage is the ending of Raymond Carver's original story entitled Want to See Something. It is 714 words in its original state. Here, edited by Lish, the ending is just 130 words, a reduction of 82%. After his split with Carver, Gordon Lish focused on his own writing and continued to champion the work of other new authors through his work at Knopf and in private writing seminars. "I don't like talking about the Carver period because of my sustained sense of his betrayal, and because it seems bad form to discuss this," he says. However, according to Max's 1998 article, by the 1990s his aggressive editing, controversial private fiction seminars, and taste for publicity had cost him many friends, and in 1994 Knopf fired him.
I'm here to talk about a book whose title is Collected Fictions. These literary effects of mine, as I've pointed out, are simply the means by which I was able to get away with murder. When John served up the galleys to me, the proofs, just weeks ago, it was 550 pages, and I said to John Oakes on the occasion of his collecting the proofs from me, the corrected proofs, I said, you know, this is a pretty strong book. This is a good book. And what's remarkable about it, it seems to me, and I say this having got it on the record that I expected to see naught but that which would shame me, what was most astonishing was that the pieces seemed in sequence to beget one another. it seemed as if, even though these issued from 4 different texts, from 4 different collections, it seemed to me that they were sequential in a way that seemed wrought, that seemed purposive, that seemed intended. But I beg you to believe there's never been anything in my life that I've done, apart from protect myself from others, that was intended.
While his arrogance has earned him many enemies in the publishing world and a somewhat notorious reputation, Lish is still inspiring to many young writers and still greatly respected by many of the authors he helped to establish over his long career.
I'm not sleeping.